Hello, welcome to another SonicLAB. That was the sound of the Waldorf Pulse 2, because that's what we're looking at it today. That was one oscillator. This is the latest synthesizer from Waldorf. It's the follow-on from the Pulse. It's a little desktop analog beauty. Let's take a look at it. So here it is. The first thing to say is it is built like a tank. It's at least twice as heavy as you'd sort of expect something of this size to be. It really has got quite an amazing heft to it. All these knobs are stainless steel topped. I guess they're surface mount, but they have a very solid positive feel to it. We should say, to recap, rewind if you like, the Waldorf Pulse 2 is a 3-oscillator analog synthesizer with digital control. It works on a parameter matrix where you've got all the parameters down the side here, then 6 knobs based on whatever parameters here. And you might think, well, for a synthesizer, analog synthesizer, that's not really the way things should be. But actually Waldorf they own this kind of format. This is their thing, I suppose. And it's surprisingly a lot less menu diving and moving around than you think. They seem to have got that quite right. So let's look around the back. We've got a 12 volt DC input and a power switch. The power supply comes included. USB connection for MIDI connectivity, then firmware updates, and also MIDI in and out ports. These are just exactly the same. There's replication. You don't access these ports separately. Then we've got CV gate outputs. These are for driving external modular kit on 1/4-inch jack, so effectively we've got a single channel of external synthesizer drive. We've got external input for running things via the filter and processing via LFO and what have you. Then a stereo output. We can run that in mono. There are some panning effects and we can modulate these as well, so you can get some extra panning. Then finally we've just got a 1/4-inch stereo headphone output, which doesn't have a dedicated level. So before we get stuck in, it's also worth mentioning that the Pulse 2 works in a paraphonic mode as well, which, as well as a single 3-oscillator monophonic, it runs as a 4-voice or an 8-voice polyphonic. And it's not true polyphony because it shares the same VCA and VCF. Simple, basic. I don't know how they do this because obviously it's not DSP based. All I know is that they do. So we should take a listen to the basic building blocks because the raw oscillators actually do sound pretty impressive. So to get to the oscillators, we just hit the parameter matrix, we go up to the oscillators, we're selecting oscillator 1. Now we've got control over the wave. We start off with just a straight pulse width mod, which we can set the pulse width, and we can also modulate that, of course. Gives us a square at the extreme. Then we got a saw. This is actually quite a nice, fat, sort of brassy sawtooth. Just a single oscillator we're listening to. Triangle. Nice and subby. These all go really high range. All over plus or minus 48 semitones. We can also switch the key tracking off completely. That means if we want, we could set them as modulating sources because we can route these oscillators through to various other parameters, so like VCA, VCF, drive level, things like that. So for instance, if I've got this 2-oscillator sound, one's pulse width, the other one's just a pulse width 2, but an octave lower. I take oscillator 3 and I change the routing, so at the moment it's just going into the mix. That up. Now I'm going to send it to oscillator 2 level. I bring that up and I change the semitone. I'm modulating the amplitude of oscillator 2, or I can send it to the VCF. And then that is actually modulating the VCF frequency, and I can take that right down to almost LFO amounts. Next up, we've got a wave called alternate pulse wave. And modulating that basically keeps the amplitude the same, but it shifts the octave. And it gives us this, again, this is a modulatable parameter, and it gives us this really nice, sort of juicy modulation sound. Next wave, Unison Mono. What this is 8 pulse waves, all in unison. We can set the pulse wave. We can also detune the amount of unison, so we can bring it right up to almost sync. Next is Unison Poly. I play one voice, I get all 8 oscillators on that voice. 2 voices, 4 each. 3, I guess, I don't know that would be, but 4 would be 2 each, and then 8 would be 1. So you get the picture there. Next is Unison Alternative Mode. Same deal, but we get the octave shift. Then we get Unison Poly Mode, which again divides it down. And then we get in the paraphonic modes. This is para 8. We get control over the pulse width. And essentially, we get up to 8 voices of square wave. Next one is paraphonic 4, which is the same, you just get 4 voices. When in paraphonic 8 mode, all oscillators are basically used up, all of the oscillator resources are used up. When you go into 4, you can also use oscillator 2, but that's it. Oscillators 2 and 3 are only available when oscillator 1 is not in any of the unison or poly modes, apart from paraphonic 4, which means you can use oscillator 2. It's quite a complex set of possibilities and options, kind of easier to use than to explain, and sort of what you want in a synthesizer, right? Oscillator 2 also has these X3 and X1 PWM modes, and what these are they'll give you this additional sort of cross modulation, almost like ring mod, to create some really complex waveforms. Oscillator 3 just gives you square, saw and triangle, external and feedback, very simple. Yes, it is also possible to sync the oscillators. Nice effect, you get a real, especially when combined with these drives. Add a bit of fuzz. You will have noticed the giant LCD display during that section, and it's true, this large backlit display does look really nice, and gives us a little line of information. And that's one thing that's weird, because if we look here, say for instance we go to one of the 2 LFOs, or perhaps one of the 2 envelopes, and close up, I've still just got attack, decay, sustain, release, and it's just showing me on this little line. I mean, far better really would be to have this sort of giant area here to be used for showing more information, maybe the shape of the waveform or the shape of the LFO or something. Can't quite fathom why they would have wasted all of that space. I mean, it's nice to know what the patch number is, but I'd much rather, when I'm programming something like this, particularly on a parameter matrix, be able to see what's going on to a greater degree. So next up is the filters, multi-mode filter. Let's take a look. Right, so I'll go to the sawtooth, and I'm going to come down to my VCF. It's a single oscillator. This is the low pass 24. Very satisfying actually sound. It's just got a almost moogie quality to it. Bring the resonance up. Bottom end does start to disappear rather, apart from in the resonance. We've got some other modes too. I'll just flip through those quickly. We've got a 12 dB. We've also got a bandpass filter. Do get a little bit of stepping, yes. and a high pass filter. Probably wondering whether it's possible to play the filter, and indeed it is. What we do is we'll just take oscillator 1, the level down, go to VCF, take the resonance right up, key track. So yeah, you can play the filter, it key tracks nicely, and in fact if you start to then get into drive, which is another aspect, this is really quite nice drive mode, we can have a drive curve of tube. This is again just a filter harmonic or fuzz. Gives us again another set of waveforms. So there's the filters. They're perhaps not massively characterful and charismatic in the same way that when you bring the resonance in on the microbrute and the sub-fatty, but the low pass with low resonance just sounds really creamy and lovely. There's also the aspect of drive that does say that you can drive the signals into the filter for that pre-filter distortion or filter distortion, but I couldn't actually detect that all that much. It just seemed to get louder to my ears. But having said that, the filters, while not perhaps as charismatic as others, they do perform a perfectly adequate function. And when you take into account the sound of the oscillators, which are really nice, they just filter them down nicely. And so you get these kind of, they enhance the charisma of the oscillators perhaps rather than the filters in their own right. Anyway, let's take a look at the envelopes. Right, so I've got this 2 oscillator sound, a pulse width mod, and a triangle oscillator to add a bit of extra thump. Filter wide open, let's bring that down a bit. Envelope amount up, and we go to the filter envelope and we can start. We start to bring. Get it really going really fast. Another thing that's quite cool is we've got a loop function. So this is applicable to both the filter envelope and the amplifier envelope, which are identical otherwise. So we'll just switch that on. And that's from the attactor to decay. So I can create a kind of envelope there. Or I can come right down. So you can see, there's quite a lot. I mean, that's just with the filter, and it's quite snappy as well. We can get a real kind of ping to it. And again, there's this sort of precision, which I quite like about the feel of it. It's sort of very forensic almost, but it doesn't mean that it's cold and clinical. It just means you've got a lot of control and it's quite predictable in what it's going to do. There's also a noise source. We get to that via VCA and turn up the noise. Just a white noise, regular thing. You can blend that in at the mix level. So a quick look at the LFOs. We've got 2 of them. We've basically got the speed for one and the shape, which can be sine, triangle, saw, square, sample and hold, and these are synced. The speed isn't bad, so the speed range, I'm just bringing it in with the part where it goes up into the audio rates. Not massively high, but that's not a problem because we can always use one of the other oscillators to take it right up if we need to go really high into the audio rates. There are 500 presets on the Pulse 2, and somebody's done a great job of programming showing off the sonic capabilities of this synth. I mean, there is quite a lot of disparity between the size and the volume of some of these things, so watch out if you're doing it on loud speakers, you might blow something up. Where the fun really starts though is when you want to program things yourself. And that's where it shows the limitations a little bit of the parameter matrix. While they've done a good job of implementing it, sometimes you might want to be accessing parameters from different parts of the synthesizer at the same time, and you just can't do that unless of course you're using MIDI control. And there are some sort of hidden extra parameters, and these come in the form of the modulation slots. There are 8 of them, and this is where the real power of the synthesizer is unleashed, in my opinion. If we go close up and I hit the shift button and mod, you can see here we've got 8 slots, and the slots allow you, they've an enormous number of parameters actually. This is something that's very cool. We've got LFOs, mod wheel, pressure, envelopes, velocity, key track to user definable controller values, and that can be positive or negative 63, and the destinations are also Legion pitch. We've got the individual oscillator pitches, which is great if you're doing this using the oscillators to modulate other parameters. Pulse width individually, oscillator levels, noise level, cutoff, resonance, volume panning, LFO speed, mod amount drive, glide rate, envelope rates for amplitude and filter envelope, unison detune, parameter fade, swing. I mean, there's a lot of destinations. And in practice, you know, I didn't find I'd used more than 3 or 4 of these, but you've got 8 to choose from. And this is where the real power of it comes. But the programming part of it it's just a little bit frustrating that you can't get to it immediately. I mean, obviously, if you had the whole thing laid out on knobs, it would be an awesome synthesizer, but it would also be awesomely expensive, especially at this build quality. It's also possible to transmit gate and CV out to external analog equipment via these 2 connectors here, and we can access those parameters by hitting Shift Global, and then that gives us access to the MIDI CV modes. We can go from volt hertz and also volt per octave, so that covers both Eurorack stuff and stuff like the MS-20 Mini. Then we've got the potential to change the CV bipolar, unipolar, pitch, CV tune, and adjust for tuning for sort of some of the older analog equipment that might not scale so well, and the gate mode, low and high for different polarities. And it's actually pretty handy because it means, you know, I could hook up some modular equipment. I've got quite a nice range of connectivity. It would have been really nice if we could address those on a separate MIDI port over USB, so we could play the unit and an external piece of equipment at the same time, but I guess we can't do that. In fact, probably a good time to talk about MIDI implementation. You get a single port, and you can set it so that the Arpeggiator will transmit over MIDI and over USB, and also you can send parameter changes either as controller values or as sysx. So if you have an existing setup and you want to use these knobs to transmit, or you want to record parameter changes, you can do that. We've also got quite a fully featured arpeggiator in here. If I go and click on the ARP, I can set the range, anything up to 10 octaves, which is a monster. Got the tempo, got the clock, which can be divisible in various different beat divisions. We've also got the ability to take a pattern from individual sounds, and that brings up the idea that we've actually got an event editor. This is pretty cool because what we can do is we can set each individual event in the pattern, so we can switch it on, we can make it we can have it reset so it would go back down again. If we start here, it'll be off, soft velocity, normal velocity, hard velocity. We've got an even number, which means it'll sound every 2 bars on the even numbers, or odd on the odd bars. We've got up the octave, and first means it plays only the first note it received. So a preset stores, as well as the sound, it stores an ARP pattern, which means that what you can do is, like we said earlier, you can bring in a pattern from any one of the sounds you've got stored in the memory. So there we have it, the Waldorf Pulse 2. I think it's actually a pretty classy synthesizer. It's the sound of the oscillators that make this thing really work, and also the routing possibilities. I don't think the filter has the characteristics and perhaps the sort of charisma of some of the other synths, but the rest of it really does it's a very pleasing sound. So you're paying about £399 UK pounds, about $799 US. You pay the European synth premium tax for that we get the other way around, but that's the way it goes. I think you are getting quite a lot of synthesizer for the money, and you know, okay, it doesn't have a lot of knobs on the front, but it's got a lot of stuff under the hood, and it is built to last, that's for sure. So if you're looking for a monosynth that is really flexible, and don't forget we've got 3 oscillators here, and we've got the possibility of playing paraphonic up to 8 voices, there's a lot to like in this synth.